Chapter 10. Decision-making without noise. Most decisions are not ruined by a lack of intelligence. They are ruined by noise. The worker sees the options, understands the trade-offs, even knows what should be done, yet the choice becomes strangely difficult. Time stretches, conversation loops, the same points are repeated with new words. The decision is postponed, or it is made abruptly in a moment of frustration, as if speed could substitute for clarity. Noise is what makes the straightforward feel complicated. Some noise is external, a room full of opinions, a thread full of messages, a schedule that leaves no quiet space for thought. But the more corrosive noise is internal. It is the emotional static that changes how information is weighted. It pulls attention toward what feels urgent rather than what matters. It turns minor risks into looming threats. It makes certain options feel intolerable, not because they are wrong, but because they activate discomfort. Neutrality is not the absence of feeling, it is the absence of emotional dominance. A neutral state can contain pressure, fatigue, even anxiety, without letting those states become the lens through which everything is interpreted. It is a kind of internal separation. The person does not need to feel calm to be neutral. They need only to stop treating sensation as instruction. When that separation exists, judgment sharpens because the mind is no longer constantly negotiating with its own reactions. This sharpening is visible first in what stops happening. The worker stops reaching for certainty that does not exist. They stop trying to predict every consequence before moving. They stop treating discomfort as evidence that an option is wrong. They stop searching for the perfect choice that will remove all risk. They begin making decisions the way reality actually allows decisions to be made, with incomplete information, under constraints, with a willingness to adjust once new information arrives. In a noisy state, incomplete information feels threatening. In a neutral state, it feels normal. Most distortion in decision-making comes from the mind's inability to tolerate the space between knowing and acting. That space is uncomfortable because it contains uncertainty. The mind would rather fill uncertainty with story than leave it open. It will interpret missing data pessimistically if the mood is heavy, and optimistically if the mood is high. It will build a forecast and then treat the forecast as a fact. The decision then becomes a response to the forecast rather than a response to what is actually known. Neutrality does not prevent forecasting. It prevents the mind from believing its forecast too quickly. A clear worker learns to separate facts from meaning and meaning from reaction. They can look at a decision without immediately turning it into an identity question. They can hold the possibility of failure without making failure feel like humiliation. They can consider trade-offs without letting trade-offs become personal. This reduces noise because a large portion of internal noise is self-protective. The mind is not merely trying to choose wisely, it is trying to avoid being wrong in a way that feels exposing. Exposure is what makes people distort. They distort by delaying, by overanalyzing, by seeking consensus beyond what is needed, by collecting more information that will ever be decisive. They distort by choosing what feels safe in the short term, even when it creates long-term cost. They distort by becoming rigid, narrowing options until only one remains, and then calling the narrowing clarity. These distortions are rarely conscious. They are the nervous system trying to protect status, identity, and the illusion of control. Neutrality reduces the need for protection. When emotion stops dictating behavior, the mind becomes less invested in being spared discomfort. It becomes more willing to accept the natural friction of choosing under uncertainty. This willingness changes the entire tempo of decision-making. The worker stops oscillating between paralysis and impulsiveness, because both paralysis and impulsiveness are attempts to manage discomfort. Paralysis avoids risk by avoiding action. Impulsiveness avoids discomfort by ending the uncertainty quickly. Neither is primarily about wisdom. Both are primarily about relief. Neutrality makes relief less urgent, so wisdom has room to operate. This is why neutral decision-making often appears slower at first, not in the sense of procrastination, but in the sense of deliberate pacing. The person is not rushing to escape the decision. They are letting the decision be what it is, a choice among imperfect options. They are willing to sit with the decision long enough to see it clearly, and because they see it clearly, they often make it faster than those who are frantic. Frantic people move quickly, but revisit constantly. Neutral people may pause, but once they move, the movement holds. Holding is the mark of a clean decision. A decision that does not hold is usually a decision made under noise. It is made to reduce discomfort rather than to create direction. The worker feels a brief sense of relief, then the mind reopens the case. They begin doubting. They begin asking others whether they agree. They begin scanning for signs that they made the wrong call. The decision becomes a wound the mind keeps touching, not because touching helps, but because noise has not been resolved. Neutrality resolves noise by reducing identification. Identification is the hidden force that turns decisions into emotional events. If a choice is interpreted as a reflection of worth, then any uncertainty becomes threatening. If a choice is interpreted as a reflection of competence, then any trade-off becomes exposure. If a choice is interpreted as a reflection of status, then any disagreement becomes a challenge. Under identification, the decision is no longer a decision, it is a performance. A performance cannot be judged cleanly because it is being judged from inside the desire to be seen a certain way. Neutrality removes the need to perform. The worker does not stop caring, they stop trying to protect an image while choosing. This is why neutrality can look like confidence. It is not always confidence in outcome, it is confidence in process. It is the sense that whatever happens, adjustment is possible, learning is possible, movement continues. When a person trusts that movement continues, the stakes of being wrong decrease. When the stakes decrease, noise decreases. Noise also enters decisions through social contamination. Most environments are emotionally contagious. If a leader is anxious, everyone speeds up. If a manager is reactive, everyone begins editing themselves. If a colleague is cynical, options begin to feel pointless. In these conditions, a decision can become a reflection of the room's mood rather than of reality. People call this culture. Culture is often just shared emotional weather. A clear worker can feel this weather without adopting it. This is one of the most practical forms of neutrality, remaining internally separate while staying externally engaged. The person does not need to disengage from others to decide well. They need to keep their own lens clean. They can listen to fear without letting fear become their own interpretation. They can listen to excitement without letting excitement inflate risk. They can listen to urgency without letting urgency collapse thought. This is how neutrality becomes a stabilizing force in group decision-making. When the room is noisy, a neutral person tends to ask different questions. They are less interested in what people feel certain about and more interested in what is actually known. They notice when the conversation is spiraling into narrative. They notice when the group is trying to solve discomfort rather than solve the problem. They bring the conversation back to constraints, to sequence, to the next action that reduces uncertainty. Reducing uncertainty is different from eliminating it. A noisy mind tries to eliminate uncertainty before moving. A neutral mind tries to reduce uncertainty by moving in ways that produce information. This is the difference between a decision that is made as a conclusion and a decision that is made as an entry. Many decisions are not endpoints, they are openings into the next phase of work. A neutral worker understands this. They do not require the decision to be perfect, they require it to be workable. Workable decisions are the ones that move reality. Reality rarely is moved by certainty, it is moved by sequence. A workable decision creates the next sequence and allows adjustment as reality responds. Noise resists this because sequence requires living inside partial information for a time. It requires tolerating the discomfort of not knowing exactly how things will unfold. Neutrality gives the nervous system enough room to tolerate that discomfort without filling it with panic. This is why neutrality is not coldness, it is capacity. It is the capacity to hold ambiguity without being hijacked. It is the capacity to see a risk without treating it as an omen. It is the capacity to acknowledge a downside without being frightened into avoidance. It is the capacity to acknowledge an upside without becoming intoxicated. It is the capacity to remain in contact with what is true rather than what is loud. There is a particular distortion that shows up when people confuse emotional intensity with seriousness. They believe that if they do not feel urgent, they are not taking the situation seriously enough. They believe that neutrality implies indifference. This belief keeps them noisy. They maintain tension to feel responsible. They maintain worry to feel prepared. They maintain agitation to feel engaged. The nervous system becomes a badge of commitment. But worry is not preparation. Agitation is not engagement. Tension is not seriousness. Neutrality allows seriousness to exist without performance. A neutral person can care deeply and still think clearly. They can be committed and still be calm. They can take consequences seriously without turning every consequence into catastrophe. In fact, neutrality often increases seriousness because it removes distraction. It clears space for the real work of judgment, which is not emotional but discriminating. Discrimination here means the ability to separate what matters from what merely feels loud. In noisy states, a person cannot discriminate well because everything feels loud. Every email feels urgent. Every opinion feels like pressure. Every unknown feels like danger. The mind becomes equalizing. It assigns similar weight to unequal things. This is one of the most common causes of decision fatigue. The person is exhausted, not because there are too many decisions, but because every decision is being processed as if it has high emotional stakes. Neutrality restores hierarchy. It allows a person to see which decisions are reversible and which are not, which risks are real and which are imagined, which variables matter and which are distractions. It allows them to allocate attention proportionately. Proportionality is the signature of good judgment. It is what noise destroys first. Under noise, small problems become large, and large problems become urgent rather than important. The worker becomes reactive to the wrong scale. A neutral worker returns to scale. They can say internally, without drama, what is happening. They can acknowledge that something matters without making it infinite. They can act without theatrical confidence. They can pause without calling it avoidance. They can move without calling it recklessness. They can choose without needing the choice to confirm their identity. Over time, this changes not only how decisions are made, but how they are lived with. Many people suffer more from the emotional residue of decisions than from the decisions themselves. They second-guess. They replay conversations. They imagine alternate worlds. They carry the decision like a weight because they remain psychologically fused to it. Neutrality reduces this fusion. The worker makes the best call available, acts, and then turns attention back to execution. If evidence appears that adjustment is needed, they adjust. If not, they do not keep reopening the case to satisfy the mind's hunger for certainty. This is a form of freedom that looks almost boring from the outside. From the inside, it is relief without sedation. It is the reduction of unnecessary mental labor. The worker is no longer exhausting themselves by living in parallel timelines. They are living in the one timeline where action occurs. They are making decisions without needing emotion to validate them, and because of that, their decisions are quieter, cleaner, and more stable. The world rewards this kind of stability, often without explicitly acknowledging what it is. People trust those whose decisions hold. Teams function better around those whose judgment does not swing with mood. Projects move faster when decisions are made without noise because there is less rework, less reversal, less emotional churn disguised as strategy. Neutrality is not an ideology, it is a practical advantage. It is what remains when the mind stops using feeling as its primary organizing principle and returns to reality as the basis for choice.